Hello, and welcome to the weekend episode of Views of an Outsider, Parenting Our Children, Parenting Ourselves, Part 4, Teaching Adolescents Responsibility. This series is based on the idea of taking the principles that would allow someone to parent a child well, and then trying to use those same principles to successfully reparent ourselves. Regardless of whether you were someone who was lucky enough to have great parents, or someone who unfortunately had parents who were not so great, one thing is for certain: no one had parents who were perfect. So, to varying degrees, we all require a bit of a do-over in order to help us let go of any unhelpful baggage that is weighing us down and holding us back. That way, we can be free to rise as high as we possibly can as we attempt to build lives for ourselves that are full of the best experiences that we can possibly manage to soak up during our time here. There are a lot of people in the world today who are selling one version or another of self-help, but hardly any of them agree in the advice that they offer to the world. So how is a person supposed to figure out whose advice they should act on? Out of all of the experts that are available to choose from, I personally think that Jordan Peterson is the one that it makes the most sense to listen to. As a world-renowned psychologist, he's highly trained and qualified. He's also actually walked the walk and successfully raised 2 kids of his own, who have not only thrived in their own lives, but they still continue to have voluntary, healthy relationships with their parents now that they're adults, which is basically the entire end goal of the parenting project, and one that every parent hopes to achieve for themselves. Even though with 1 out of every 4 young people going completely no contact with their parents, it seems like fewer and fewer people are succeeding on that front. But to top all of that off, Jordan's advice is a proven track record. It has worked for thousands of people who have tried it, including his children, who are now successfully raising his 6 grandchildren, while also running thriving business ventures of their own. With a resume that boasts all of those selling points, you really couldn't ask for much more when trying to decide who to trust. And that's where Jordan's new parenting series comes into the picture. I find it fascinating and extremely practical, which is Jordan's forte. And even though the advice that he offers in this series is tailored specifically for parents and soon-to-be parents, perhaps there are also some insights that we can find in these lessons that will help the rest of us when it comes to discovering the best way to set about reparenting ourselves. In the first week of this series, we took a look at the roles that parents play in their children's lives. We considered what the spirit of the mother brings to her child's world, and what the spirit of the father brings as well. We also looked at the perspectives that they should each try to incorporate into their roles, and we considered some of the pitfalls to each role that can be avoided if parents are properly prepared ahead of time to watch out for them. Then we took all of that information and applied it to the idea of raising ourselves to be the people that we each aspire to be. Then for the last 2 weeks, we zoomed in on toddlerhood. We looked at this magical time in human development and at the common misbehaviors that come along for the ride. We took in both the positive things and the negative things about this brief window in a child's life, and we discussed the best ways to maximize all of the potential in this goldmine phase of development in order to successfully set the child up for a productive and happy life. Then once again, we took all of that information and applied it to the idea of helping ourselves mature into becoming the kind of people that we admire. This week, we are going to jump forward in the childhood journey to another turbulent phase in the development of young people, and focus in on adolescence. And we should probably start off by recognizing straight out of the gate that the key to unlocking a life that will be an enriching environment for a young adult to flourish in is to successfully teach them responsibility. There comes a time in every child's life when they realize that they are standing on the precipice of adulthood. Naturally, that transition is both exciting, confusing, and scary all at the same time, and each of those emotions are bound to generate a lot of questions. So it is hardly surprising that adolescence is a time when newly fledged teens begin to brim with thoughts about things like identity, autonomy, and meaning. And it is during this important window of time that learning responsibility becomes crucial, both as a way of answering those big questions of life, and in order to lay the foundations for a future in which they will thrive. So, as a parent, what do you do when you have a difficult 13-year-old who isn't taking the appropriate amount of responsibility for their life? How can a parent encourage them to step into the first phase of a mature life? There are 3 lessons that will help us figure out the many answers to that question, and hopefully we will be able to unearth some insights for ourselves when it comes to figuring out how to go about embracing responsibility in our own lives as well, as we labor to build happy, meaningful futures for ourselves. Lesson 1 is, spoiled children do not develop independence. Children can easily end up becoming spoiled if their parents are desperately trying to make up for some lack that they felt during their own childhoods. The problem is that when this happens, things are conflated with love. And that is a very unhealthy and a very untrue thing to teach your child by mistake. If your child also happens to be an only child, or they were an only child for many years, then the opportunity and the temptation to spoil them can become even greater. Under those circumstances, it becomes even more likely that the child will come to believe that they are the center of the universe and the only person in it who really matters. And unfortunately, early training like that is not going to serve them very well throughout their lives, because their world is going to be full of other people who actually do matter just as much as they do. But if your child is disconnected from that fundamental reality, then they are not going to be set up very well to thrive in their lives. If you give in to the natural temptation to overindulge your child while they are small, then you are not only setting them up for a lifetime of misery, but you are also setting yourself up to have a large 13-year-old who still behaves in the same way that they did when they were small, by throwing tantrums and screaming when they don't get their way. Likewise, all of us are an only child in the sense that we are the only person that is living inside of our own heads. We are the only person whose consciousness gets experienced by us firsthand. And as such, it isn't difficult to end up over-empathizing with our own immaturities or to end up spoiling ourselves. We can easily inflate our own importance without meaning to, because we are the only person that we get to experience in this very vivid way. It is second nature for us to take the easy way out and to make excuses for the person that we know better than we know anyone else in the world. After all, this is also the person in whom we are the most invested. But overindulgence and making excuses is not setting that person up for a very good experience of this life either. So how do you get your teenagers through the pitfalls of adolescence in a way that will help them become a responsible adult? How can you have real conversations with them that are calm and productive, instead of merely trying to survive in an environment that is growing increasingly toxic each year for the both of you? A good rule of thumb for caregivers of any kind is that they should never do anything for any person in their care that the person can do for themselves. This extremely simple and practical rule is designed so that you can foster the independence of the person that you are caring for and support that independence as it grows. You should voice your confidence in the person that you are caring for by recognizing their existing degree of competence and not allowing it to be snuffed out by stepping in too much. This will also limit the amount of investment that you have to put into the person that you're caring for, which will keep your investment at a reasonable level so that it doesn't eventually end up making you feel resentful towards them. Don't allow yourself to fall prey to the instincts of the Oedipal mother, consuming your child with a suffocating love that interferes with the independence that your child needs in order to develop and to be happy. An overbearing love is beyond damaging to a child and to their quality of life, and it is not good for the parent either. The parents who allow themselves to do this already know that it's destructive deep down. So when we are doing something wrong, even while we tell ourselves that this is what we want to do, and we rationalize it and say that there is nothing wrong with it, there is still a sickening feeling to doing it. There is shame attached to it for both you and for the child. Take that shame as a warning flare and instead actually encourage your child to do whatever they are capable of doing for themselves. Because if life is too good at home and too easy, then they'll never leave. And the only time that this result sounds tempting for parents is when there are some extremely destructive tendencies at play. Parents should understand that when they spoil their child by doing too many things for them, what they are really doing is taking something away from their child. The opportunity to develop their own skills and their own competence, which is where they will derive their sense of value as an individual. And the result of stealing this from your kid is that they will be forced to live as an overgrown child in a life that makes them feel very, very trapped. Now, there might still be some parents out there who will still say to themselves, well, what's really wrong with letting my kids be children forever? Doesn't that mean that I love them more than other people do? It doesn't mean that at all. What it actually means is that you are so afraid of losing them when they become independent and move away from you that you are interfering with their healthy development in order to prevent them from having a full life. You are deciding to deliberately stunt their growth. And by doing that, you are restricting their experiences in this life to something that is very small indeed. I'm not trying to be harsh, but to do all of that for the sake of your own comfort and feelings is a selfish decision, not a loving one. And what is even worse, by stunting your kids' development and condemning them to a life of eternal immaturity, you're setting your beloved child up for perpetual failure and thus for unending misery. After all, failure is not a pleasant experience for anyone. Setting someone up to suffer is not love. And we have to be honest with ourselves about that. Above all, love means never hurting the object of your love. You also have to love yourself enough to do what is right by you. Making excuses for yourself and never choosing to create the conditions that would actually allow you to grow and to expand beyond the boundaries of your present world isn't doing yourself any favors. It is setting yourself up to lead a very small life with very limited experiences in the midst of a lot of unhappiness, misery, and hopeless despair. If you set your life up in a way that virtually guarantees that you are going to be denied the things that you long for the most due to an ongoing string of failures, then you are going to begin to think of yourself as a failure. And none of that is a recipe for enjoying your life. If your child doesn't learn how to be independent at home when they're a teenager, then how can you be justified in thinking that they'll be able to take care of themselves when they leave home? Competent independence doesn't just appear overnight by magic. Fostering confidence and self-reliance in your child is very close to being the number one job of a parent. And it's a goal that you have to be deliberate about pursuing. You want to set things up for your child in a way where they have a reasonable chance of succeeding at what is being asked of them. You're trying to create the right environment for your child to take one more step forward towards maturing. And because your child is a unique individual, you will have to customize how you go about assessing the achievements that will help them to do that. You don't want to approach a task that is this important in a spirit that is either punitive or inappropriately rewarding. So how can you recognize when a reward is inappropriate? A really helpful answer is when you give them a reward for doing something that didn't stretch them past their current limits. Rewards are meant to recognize growth, not stagnation. Now, there doesn't have to be major growth. They don't have to stretch much. This isn't about requiring a massive leap forward. That's an unreasonable bar to set in exchange for your child getting a little encouraging praise from you. But you also don't want to carelessly throw rewards away as if they have no value. Because if you do that, all you actually end up doing is inflating that particular currency and ultimately making it worthless. If you praise your child for everything that they do, good and bad, your praise becomes meaningless. But you can still be generous with your praise as long as you are being aware about making sure that the praise is valid and deserved. You have to do the same thing with yourself. You need to encourage growth and to encourage continually increasing levels of competence in yourself in order to foster your own ability for self-reliance. But you are not going to achieve that goal by browbeating yourself, nor are you going to get there by doling out phony kudos to yourself all the time. You shouldn't be stingy when it comes to giving yourself a well-deserved pat on the back, but only when you have actually grown and stretched a little bit further in the direction that you wanted to. There's a reason that adolescence has a reputation for being a difficult time to navigate. Consider this example. Say that your 13-year-old can't handle life. When they want something right now, and for whatever reason, you tell them no. Or if their level of maturity is such that they just completely melt down when it becomes clear that things are not going to happen in the way that they thought they were. In those instances, you can often find yourself being confronted by an aggressive teenager who is screaming in your face, and that is neither good nor acceptable. If your child doesn't have a history of physical violence with other people, including you, if they have shown that they are capable of making friends and keeping them, if they get along well with their teachers and coaches, then you probably don't have a child who suffers from a fundamentally antisocial nature. So it might just be a problem with a lack of negotiation skills. A good place to start assessing that is by asking yourself how much of your time together goes well. Let's assume it's around 75% of the time. Well, that's not a bad place to start. Now, let's assume that your goal is to get that number up to around 95% of the time. How can you achieve that? If you were to ask your teenager if they enjoyed the blowouts between you, what would they say? If they don't have some deeper issues, then they probably don't enjoy those scenarios either. And if that is the case, it's fairly safe to assume that they would also like to work towards creating a situation where 95% of the time things are going well for them. Congratulations, you now have the grounds to negotiate together in good faith, because you're both getting something positive out of working on this problem together. Likewise, it is helpful to come up with reasonable grounds for being able to successfully negotiate with yourself. After all, creating a better experience of life is something that will improve the world for you and for the more immature or damaged sides of you. Within this framework, everyone can get on board. So as a parent, start by making a list of all of the things that your teenager does that are positive. This is helpful because it is important to realize that the goal isn't just to get them to stop misbehaving. You also want to expand what they're already successfully doing and extend that positive productivity so that it keeps stretching until it encompasses their entire life. In that way, the expanding positive behaviors simply crowd out the destructive misbehaviors. One way to go about doing that is to let your teenager know when you see them doing something that is good, especially when they're doing something better than they previously did. You should tell them exactly what they did that was positive. This is a very useful approach when it comes to creating the right environment for improvements, because most people respond in an unbelievably powerful way to positive reinforcement, and you will too. You need to pay attention to your own little victories on your journey of growth too. You need to be specific about where you see improvements in yourself, and you need to take the time to notice that those improvements are there and to celebrate each of them. Doing that will help you to stay motivated. If you're the sort of parent that only pays attention to your child when they're misbehaving, then you can expect an awful lot of that misbehavior going forward. Adult attention is the currency of childhood, and they will do anything to get it. If you are stingy with the attention that you voluntarily give to your kids, then they are going to resort to stealing it. So if you have a child who is consistently misbehaving in a particular way, then you and your spouse should ask yourself what the two of you might be doing to contribute to that situation. How is your household set up so that the child is getting something of value to them from continuing in that particular pattern of misbehavior? And the answer might very well be the attention that they don't get for doing things that are positive. Changing that habit so that you give as much attention to the positive things as you do to the negative requires effort and action. For example, if your child doesn't ever clean up their room, and once a week you have a fight about that, and this is the only time that you ever talk, then the child is getting at least some attention by continuing to have a messy room. At that point, you have to think about how you could respond positively to small improvements in your child's housekeeping behaviors so that they get more out of having a clean room than they do out of having a messy one. Then experiment with your ideas and see what works. And be sure to pay very careful attention to the small improvements that they make, because doing that is how you are going to see ongoing change. Likewise, if you have patterns of behavior that you don't like in yourself, and yet you can't seem to change them, it can be helpful to explore what you are getting out of continuing in that particular misbehavior. Then you can attempt to set up a more productive incentive structure for yourself, one that will stack the deck in your favor and allow you to succeed in your own goals. When it comes to reducing teenage temper tantrums, try measuring the problem in two ways so that you can set up some goals for improving the situation. First, measure the number of tantrums per week. And second, measure the length of time that they last. Your goal should be to have fewer tantrums per week and to have them become shorter over time. So the first step is just to watch and gather information for a couple of weeks so that you have a baseline to start with. You may have an estimate in your mind already, but you might want to have something that is truly solid to work with, because that often helps. It's useful to really know that last week we had 5 tantrums and they lasted between 10 minutes and 90 minutes. After you've gathered together the information that you need to start, you can sit down with your teenager and review it together. Just don't put the blame on them, because that's a bad place to start. After all, you don't know how you might be contributing to this too. It could be them, but especially if there are environments where this behavior doesn't happen, then there is at least some evidence that the situation is not all on them. There is something about your dynamic together that isn't working. So the best attitude to take as a family is to assume that each of you is contributing to the problem in some way, even if you are not aware of how. and now you're going to work as a team to improve things for all of you. The three of you could sit down for a discussion where you are straightforward enough to say, we would like it if we got along better. And we assume that you would like that too. So we need to make a plan to figure out how we're going to be able to do that. We observe that this happens 5 times a week, and we're not saying that it's your fault. We're saying that we'd like to figure out what's really going on. And you could help us figure out the best way to decrease how often this is happening, and also how to shorten how long it lasts. That way we can keep track of what's working and see where we can keep improving things. So we're going to try to shrink both of those numbers over the next 3 months. And then ask them what they think about that, or what they think would be a good target to aim for. You need to know what they think about the plan because you need to see if they're on board or if they're not, and if they have concerns or some alternative suggestion. When you're dealing with a teenager, they've reached an age where you have to negotiate with them. And if you treat them like an adult insofar as the situation allows, doing that is probably going to work in your favor anyway. Likewise, you need to be really observant with yourself and establish a solid baseline for how often you are engaging in behaviors that you want to see change. That at least will give you a starting point so that you can set some initial goals for yourself to encourage incremental improvements. And you can negotiate with yourself in order to keep those goals reasonable, because you have to be fully on board with yourself in order to get anywhere. Force isn't going to work over the long run. You need to be heading in a specific direction and not be divided or sabotaging yourself. If you already have a teenager and you're afraid that it's too late because you've already let your boundaries become too lax, now you are going to have an unpleasant choice on your hands. You can either continue on with what you have been doing, in which case you're going to be in for at least 5 more years of hell, and a lifetime of not seeing eye to eye with your kid after that. Or you can start doing what you would have been better off doing much earlier, under better circumstances, and face up to having the necessary battles now. But you have to realize that if you've delayed discipline from the age of 3 to the age of 13, then you're going to have to handle 10 years worth of battles in a relatively condensed period of time before you get on track. And that's not going to be particularly pleasant. But it is way better than waiting another 5 years and then having nearly 20 years worth of battles to get through before you can arrive in a healthy place with your kid. Sit down with your spouse and decide in very concrete terms not only where you think things have gone wrong, but you also need to flesh out the vision of what you would rather see happen instead. And then, once the two of you have examined the terrain and come up with the initial plan of attack, then it's time to have a chat with your teenager. You want to start interacting with them in a way that acknowledges that they're moving towards adulthood and that you think of them as being capable of having a genuine, meaningful conversation with you. You will get pushback and misbehavior along the way for sure, because they're not going to believe you if you've established a pattern of non-credible behavior with them. But it really is a case of better late than never. To sum up, what are the lessons that you might take away from this first lesson of parenting through adolescence? Spoiled children do not develop independence, and that means that if you do too much for your child, they won't learn to develop the skills that will enable them to master their own life. And when it comes to your own journey, if you make excuses for yourself, then you won't grow into the person that you truly want to be. And that means that you will always be dissatisfied with your life instead of feeling like you have some agency over it. We will be covering the 2 remaining lessons of adolescence next week. You're not going to want to miss those. And in the weeks that follow, we will be considering what the future holds for all of us by looking at the effects of raising our daughters on social media and by looking at what is happening to our sons in the digital age as well. But it won't be all doom and gloom, because we will also be discussing what parents can realistically do about saving their children from the downsides of this modern fate. We will also cover strategies for helping children survive both bullying and peer pressure. And finally, we will take an in-depth look at the lost art of resilience. So I hope that you keep coming back. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please help me build this podcast into a success by clicking like and follow, because that's what does the trick in making these things successful. And I hope that you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.